Hello, this is Alicia with another Heuristic podcast, and today we are talking to Karin Reed. Karin is the CEO of Speaker Dynamics. She is a confidence creator, an award-winning author, and a communication expert, and she's actually writing her fourth book, which I find to be amazing. Karin, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I'm just delighted to be here with you and have you in my network of friends and colleagues. So looking forward to a fun conversation. Yeah, the fourth book is an exciting thing, but right now we're really thrilled to have our third book come out, Suddenly Hybrid, managing the modern meeting. And it's written in collaboration with Dr. Joseph Allen, who is a meeting scientist. So as a video communication expert, I come at it from a practitioner standpoint, and I call him Joe. Dr. Allen comes at it from a scientist perspective. And, certainly with everything that's happened during the pandemic, there have just been so many changes in how we gather, and hybrid being the most recent one that is really taking hold right now. So the fourth book, just to give you a little preview, is about, it's a For Dummies book. So we're excited. It's running effective meetings for dummies. But that is a long way down the road at this point. Right now, we're really excited about Suddenly Hybrid.
Yeah, well, I think before it was Suddenly Remote, now it's Suddenly Hybrid. Both of those books are really valuable and great insight for people that maybe this whole doing things on video and getting things done together on video, new thing.
Right. I mean, I've been a video evangelist for many, many years, began as a broadcast journalist, then became an on-camera spokesperson, then started helping people who never imagined they'd have to be on camera how to do that. So I've been teaching these on-camera communication skills for a long time, but it was only in the last 2 years that I went from training the executive leadership team to training the entire enterprise, because everybody suddenly has to be able to communicate through that little lens. So it's been a really interesting vantage point to be in my position and watching all of this unfold.
Yeah, and it's funny how I've come at it from, definitely on the practitioner side of how do we ensure that people can communicate with each other, even if they're not in the same room together.
Right.
Yeah. And, so it's definitely, here we are meeting sort of in the middle here with this overlap of concerns from completely different vantage points, which I think is just so interesting.
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed that in the book, reading a lot of insights that are kind of like, oh yeah, that's in the space that I operate in. Very,
Absolutely.
very relevant.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, in being able to communicate and collaborate effectively through video or in a hybrid situation is very, very related to the heuristic that I would like to talk about. And it's one of the core ones. And it's actually really a restatement of the mission of Performentor. And that is to unleash people energy and to fight entropy. So what do I mean by that is any organization is really a collection of people trying to do something together. So we're unleashing the energy of the people and doing it in a way that creates sustainable economic value. And part of that is that you don't want that energy to go and be dispersed and distributed in ways that are not helpful. So that's the fighting entropy part of things. And so it seems important, and then it's something that I certainly think about. And to me, the work that you do certainly is very advantageous for that. So that's why I wanted to talk about this heuristic with you.
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of different thoughts that are going through my head right now when I think about, unleashing energy. It seemed like during our fully virtual days, it was all about how it's sapping our energy. But in my view, it was less a problem with being on video and more a problem with being in meetings constantly. Because there was just a meeting explosion that occurred. We were in more meetings than ever before, and those meetings were longer. And without a commute, oftentimes that commute was replaced by, yes, another meeting. And so people were on video calls or at a minimum virtual meeting calls from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. And everybody was complaining about Zoom fatigue. No, Zoom, it's so terrible. But it's not the platform. It's what happened related to the number of meetings that clog our calendars. And so there has been a recalibration that I've seen where people recognize that we're just sapping people's energy. We're not unleashing it. And by recalibrating the number of meetings that people have and making sure that if you have a meeting, it should be a meeting in the first place, that's allowing people to kind of preserve some of that energy that people were feeling, sapped of. So I think that's a really interesting step that we're seeing in this next phase, where we're like still kind of in the pandemic, sort of post-pandemic-ish, like still in the height of it, depending upon where you live. I mean, it changes weekly, and it certainly is impacted by your geography.
Yeah. Or if you have kids in school and where.
Oh my goodness. Yes. I mean, that is really exhausting. I had a client who reached out to me. I did a big webinar and she was in attendance, and she said, I didn't want to ask the question in the big group, but what do you tell working parents, during this time, for those meetings? And, I really feel for them because thankfully, mine are old enough to not pop their heads into, my webinar as I'm live, but, a lot of people don't have that luxury. So I'm well aware of that. And, the one thing I will say, and you probably, echo this too, Alicia, is that there has been a greater sense of empathy that I think has developed throughout the pandemic. People, understand people's personal challenges at home more so than ever before. We're in this situation where we're separated, but in some ways we're more intimate with our colleagues than ever. I was working with a client who runs a big company. He said, before, I knew people as like their roles, but now, I've had so many one-on-one meetings with some of my new hires that I know more about them than I know about any of the people who worked here for like 20 years. I know about their families. I know what pets they have, because you're in this situation where you have a portal into people's personal lives. And that's created a really interesting dynamic. And have you seen that as well from your position?
Oh, definitely. I've been along kind of hybrid / remote for 10 years at least now, so this is not new to me, but I am seeing a little bit more comfort, in terms of, oh, it's okay, kind of like going, oh, I'm sorry, that's my child calling me in the background, or somebody rang the doorbell to deliver a package and now my dog's going crazy.
Right. Yeah.
Here's a few examples from today, right?
From today. It's funny. I used the video clip of the professor. I think he was in Korea at the time. And do you remember he was on a BBC interview and his kids came toddling in. Yes. And that was in 2017. And at the time that went viral. People were just freaking out that occurred. But now we've all seen the kid cameo. We've all seen the cat cameo, and it's not a big deal. So it's less of being embarrassed and more about, okay, how do you deal with the interruption? And, what I counsel people to do is just say, excuse me, just a minute, turn off your video, turn off your audio, and then go deal with whatever needs to be dealt with. Come back as quickly as possible. Just a short apology and then get back to business, because people get it, and I think that is a major change that has occurred over the past several years.
Yeah, I think that's completely correct. I mean, I actually could relate to the kid cameo. So when that video came out, I was just, like dying.
Right, because you remember he tried to pretend like it wasn't happening. He was like, no, you're not seeing this going on behind me. And we're like, yeah, we are. We're totally seeing it. And so I wonder if he had to encounter that situation today, how would he respond? Maybe he'd, pick up the child and put her on his lap, just because that's the world that we live in today. So, and I feel like there's got to be some sort of advantage to that, in that there's less of what Joe, the meeting scientist, would call surface acting, where you're pretending like everything is perfect in your world. So that's what it looks like on camera, but there's total chaos going on around you. There might be a less of an inclination to feel like you have to surface act as much, just because we've all seen it. We've all seen the craziness that could occur.
Well, it's been us. So sitting back and just judging, even folks that maybe don't have kids, they have the fur babies, right?
Yeah,
Certainly
yeah.
experience this as well. No, I think it's a good thing. I think that there's been this, like earlier in my career, this idea of professionalism is pretending as if you do not have a life outside of work.
Yes.
Yeah, and there is no pretending now.
No, and I think maybe we're going from, professionalism perfection to professionalism authenticity.
Mm.
And that's authenticity that is reflected in everything you do. And certainly the leaders that I work with who are the most successful and have the most executive presence, a lot of it is due to the fact that they are just authentically themselves. And that's what resonates with their employees. So I think that's a really interesting observation to see that shift.
Yeah, and it felt like it was a shift that was happening, but just like everything else, all the other changes that have been happening over the past few years, this has just really been an accelerant.
There's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
Literally, there's nowhere to hide. And maybe you are able to carefully curate your space. Like, I've done it, but I have to. It's my brand. But that's not been something that a lot of folks can do. And so it's consequently, made them just realize, hey, I'm doing what I can do, but this is me, this is my situation, and please accept it. And I think that that's a positive step.
Yeah. So back to that whole, like, do Zoom meetings and Zoom calls, like we're on Zoom now, right? How much did they steal energy, sap energy, and how much can it unleash energy? And what are the sorts of things that you're, I guess, maybe discovering together with your clients and your co-author are the things that actually move us toward unleashing energy?
So the thing that you don't want to do in a Zoom meeting is just simply information share. If there's no interaction expected, and you're not dealing with material that is so sensitive that it has to be delivered live in a way that you can actually, perhaps take questions afterwards, then that should be pushed into an asynchronous modality. So that will help to cut down on some of those energy sapping meetings. So say that you want to do, a presentation on, a project that you'd been working on, but you're really not looking for interaction. You're not looking for collaboration. You just want to share it. You can hop on a Zoom meeting by yourself. You can share your slides, share your screen, record it, send it off to your colleagues, and they can take a look at it at a time that's convenient for them and perhaps not break up their day in a way that doesn't make sense for the other things that they have going on. So that's one thing I always counsel people to do, is try to move into a more asynchronous way of working, as opposed to just, defaulting to the calendar invite, because that's what makes it really challenging. There's also a need to consider the time spent in a Zoom meeting. Yeah, do you remember those meetings in person where they'd be scheduled for like 2 or 3 hours and you'd have an agenda that was like 3 pages long? That will not work in a virtual meeting. That is way too much to ask of people. And, what I say is, if it's going to go beyond 45 minutes, you've got to take a break, give people just an opportunity to stretch, to take a bio break, just have a brain reboot so that you can get back down to business. But also, any meeting like this should be interactive. You want to make sure that it is a collaborative experience, because if you just want people to show up and just kind of sit there as spectators, that is not going to work. It takes too much energy and focus to, sit in a passive observer position. But sometimes people will do that because they're like, well, we probably should have, Jane here because she probably needs to know what's going on. She's not participating, but we'll just have her on like a fly on the wall. She doesn't have to be there. Record that meeting, send it to Jane afterwards and let her look at it. Because it becomes unwieldy. If you have too many faces on the screen, it becomes unwieldy.
Yeah, well, that, and You say that you have a meeting and somebody's there just to listen. Guess what? They're actually not doing most of the time.
Not listening, they're multitasking for sure,
They are.
especially if they have their camera off. If they have the camera off, they're not paying
They're
attention
gone.
whatsoever.
It's interesting. You talk about, meeting length. In this time of year, very commonly we're doing quarterly planning sessions, sometimes annual planning sessions, and these are often half day, full day. So, and a lot of these organizations have moved them from in person to remote. And I know one client, for example, took their full day session and broke it into 2, and then I think now 3-day partial day sessions online.
Yeah. Smart.
Yet I was talking to one of my consultants, and she said she was just in the other day an 8-hour Zoom meeting.
Like, that is so crazy. I can't, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. You can't do that. The time spent in this meeting room is different than the time spent in a conference room, because you don't have that chance to go and, pour yourself a glass of water, walk around the room a little bit, or even just to go take a bio break. I mean, that is really awful to hear. I feel sorry for them.
I'm sure she had breaks, but by the time, so she and I were having our one-on-one, which we have every couple of weeks, which is like short, usually, well, sometimes we're video, sometimes phone, and just, she's like, Alicia, I'm not turning on my video.
But you know what, that's okay, because do you know her well?
Yeah.
So that's when I would say it's okay to give people a break, because the reason why video is so important is you want to be able to read the intent of somebody's message, and you also want to be able to understand the impact of your message. But if you know somebody really well, you know when they're going to roll their eyes, how to interpret that kind of intake of air, that means, oh, they didn't like what I just said. If you have a pre-existing relationship with somebody, you can fill in the gaps. The problem is whenever you are interacting with people that you don't know that well, for example, like if you have a new hire, if there's a policy to keep your video off, that puts that new hire at such a disadvantage, because they don't have that life experience and that experience with you to fill in those visual blanks. And that's when you're really doing people a disservice.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the hybrid meeting, because I was just on a meeting, it's probably earlier this week. I don't know, my weeks run together. And there was some of the team was, I think most of the people were in person, and there's like maybe 2 of us remote, or 3 of us, maybe, I don't know. Okay. But so, and the person that was facilitating the meeting was also in person. Okay. And I recall how easy it was for that group to start talking with each other, or some people not facing the mic or whatever was serving as the mic enough.
So it was hard to hear.
And it was very hard to hear, or I couldn't even see who was talking. I guess I would assume this is very common, because I can think of 2 examples that recently this has happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, there have been some companies that have anticipated a return to a hybrid work scenario, and they have equipped their meeting rooms to be able to conduct them effectively. Yeah. There have been a lot of companies who have not thought about it and have just stuck with their old, systems. I've heard of people who, think it's a hybrid meeting. If you take a laptop, you stick it at the end of the conference room table, and you open it up and click on the Zoom link. So like you can sort of see them down the end of the table. That's not an effective hybrid meeting, because the goal of any sort of hybrid meeting is to ensure presence for all. And that means to be able to be seen and heard clearly, no matter where you are and what position that you are attending the meeting from, whether it be remote or in person. So otherwise, you have like a 2-tiered system, right? You have, in your case, there was an in-room bias, which was exacerbated by the fact that the person who was leading the meeting was in the room as well. And there wasn't attention made to raise the collective awareness of everybody in the conference room that, hey, this isn't just our meeting right here with the people that you can reach out and touch. The meeting is actually involving people who are coming in from elsewhere, and we need to be as inclusive as possible so that they are getting an opportunity to participate in full as well. So this actually comes at two things that we talk a lot about in Suddenly Hybrid, that yes, it's the responsibility of the leader to have an effective hybrid meeting, but it's also the responsibility of the attendees to have an effective hybrid meeting, because they also need to make themselves aware and be in-room allies for those who are joining virtually. So, for example, if you had a friend who is going to be there in person, maybe you tag that person ahead of time and say, hey, I'm joining virtually. I'm afraid that I might be forgotten. Can you be my buddy? Can you be my in-room buddy? And that way you have somebody who is an advocate in the room for your voice. And it gives them a responsibility to say, hey, Alicia might have a really, good opinion on this. Let's let her, talk about it. So things like that really make a difference. And whenever we look at the data, the early data from those who are doing hybrid meetings well, they're making those changes. They're implementing those strategies. Another thing that I see across the board from clients who are satisfied with their hybrid meetings is that they have a policy that remote speak first. Meaning if you get to a topic in the agenda, rather than turning, like say that's the leaders in the actual conference room, rather than turning to the person to his or her right and say, what do you think? Instead, they're looking at the screen and saying, Alicia, what do you think? And what that does is it sends a signal that you are equally valued as those who are physically present. So there's a lot of misconceptions about how you can run these meetings. If you try to do a free-for-all, it's not going to work, because there's inherent power of being in the room because you have more senses that are involved, and it's just easier. But you can have it be a really inclusive meeting that reflects today how we want to work. People want flexibility. They want to be able to work from anywhere and at any time. And so you have to accommodate that with your meeting strategy as well.
I do. I was thinking just the call on the remote people first. Remember reading that, and the other thing that you mentioned that I know I've certainly used, even with just remote, is the calling out of people, especially those that might be introverted or might be reticent to speak up. Just
cold calling with good intention is what we call it, where you're not trying to put people on the spot, but you're trying to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. And the only way you can do that without freaking people out, very honestly, is to create that psychological safety around the answer that is permissible. So you just say, hey, just so you know, I'm going to call on people. I'm going to call on people by name. It's not because I'm trying to embarrass you or, call you out, but it's a way of making sure that you can participate and you have a voice, and that we don't overlook you. But if you don't have anything to add, it is perfectly okay for you to say pass. That is absolutely fine. So if you establish that psychological safety in the beginning, and you also set the expectation that you are going to call on people, it will shift the dynamic a little bit. But it's all in how you ask, right? If you are, really cognizant of how that question might feel, you want to approach it from hey, I know that you have some really deep expertise in this. I think your opinion would be really valuable, Alicia. Can you just tell us, what do you think? What hits you whenever you hear this? Like, that's very different than, Alicia, I want you to say this, so it's all in how you approach pulling out that participation. That's going to give people, a level of comfort to actually speak up.
Yeah, I mean, I learned this, and this was even in person, probably one of the most quiet, introverted people ever in the world. And he's very analytical, of course. And our boss at the time would, every once in a while, his name was Jeff, if you have anything to add, I know that when you have it, it's always really insightful. And sometimes he would be like, Nothing. And then other times he would have something really profound to say. It was
Right.
really great.
Right. And I have a son who is a similar sort of personality to that. And I have one son who is the ooh, 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 who, always had his hand up. And my other son who would just sit back and spend more time thinking about it. And then eventually he'd raise his hand. And then what he'd say would be very deep. Unfortunately, sometimes the opportunity to add that input had already passed. So it was unfortunate that he wasn't able to time that out. His cognition time has shrunk a little bit, the older he's gotten. So that's been good. But I think it's also important to validate different forms of participation. So for example, if you have an introvert, they might be more comfortable putting something in chat. And that is a habit that I would say pull from our fully virtual lives into hybrid, because it does give people a voice, even those who might be reticent to speak up. But it is incumbent upon the meeting leader or even the meeting attendees to draw attention to it and to pull it into the dialogue, because you don't want the chat just to be a parking lot for comments that are never looked at all. It's pointless. So think about participation in a different way than just verbal.
Yeah, this is all really good insights. And as I mentioned, I've been living this, and sometimes there's the curse of knowledge.
Right. So true. Yeah.
I've figured out a lot of these things out. I figured out, how to navigate the technology, and it's been fun working with people who are also learning the skills and how the quality of the meeting improves the more that we figure out how to do this thing. So this is just both the book about hybrid and the book about just pure remote. An incredible resource. I think that is relevant for just about everybody these days.
We're all suddenly hybrid and suddenly virtual, so, and it really, what we tried to do with both books, Suddenly Hybrid and Suddenly Virtual, was to make them really practical. I wrote it with a meeting scientist, so of course there's theory in it, but there's also a lot of practical tips and strategies and checklists and tools and, bulleted takeaways. So, it's designed to be something where it's a reference that you can come back to and use. That's really what we wanted to be for folks. And Suddenly Virtual was very well received. And that's why Suddenly Hybrid happened, because our executive editor said, hey, can you write another one about this hybrid thing? Because we're getting a lot of requests. And we're like, yeah. So that's how it happened so quickly. But hopefully it will be a help to a lot of people.
I think, tremendously. I for one, love the bulleted lists. And
I do too. My own bias, for sure.
And the graphics and things. But then my colleague, who's a scientist by training, is like, oh, it's called the science in it. I'm like, yes.
Well, and actually it would be interesting too, Alicia, a lot of, I've been training people for a long time. And, so I call myself like Joe's color commentator, because he would, do the sciencey stuff. And I'd say, yeah, I saw that happen when when this and this and this occurred. And then I'd provide my story of how that plays out in the wild. And, that's been really fascinating too. So the things that I've kind of felt, actually had scientific basis, which was pretty cool.
It is. Absolutely. I love that. Like there's this consilience between these two threads, which is certainly the space that I love to work in. Is like people are messy and we love stories, and then science informs us, and where does it intersect? And I think that's a really, really rich place, and it's really cool to see that the work that you're doing is intersecting in that space as well. But anything else as we wrap up that is important to share or convey as it relates to your book, as it relates to unleashing people energy?
Well, I think the key thing is, and especially when you talk about people energy, is there is often a tendency to overlook the value of training. And that is so critical as we move into this hybrid space, training on the technology, but also training on the people skills. This, we call it train on the hardware, the software, and the skillware. So the tech is pretty easy to understand. I tell the story of working with a client who, she was a member of a very large sales force, and I was in her one-on-one session, and her image quality was really, really grainy. I was like, didn't the company send you a webcam? And she said, oh yeah, it's in the closet. It's still in the box. I'm like, what are you talking about? Why didn't you take it out of the box? She's like, well, I didn't know how to plug it in. I'm like, oh my gosh. So we ended up spending the one-on-one session unboxing her webcam and setting it up. Companies have a tendency to think if we give them the tools, then that's all we need to do. But you can't. You have to empower them to use them, or else they will simply collect dust, whether that is literally collecting dust or metaphorically collecting dust. Just because you have the software solution doesn't mean that they're going to use it. So take the time to train them on whatever technology you're using to create what we would call participation equity or collaboration equity, across the hybrid workforce. The other thing I would suggest is training your leaders and having them train their teams to recalibrate for a hybrid workforce and a hybrid meeting, because there's a lot that has to shift, a lot of things that don't work whenever you're dealing with multiple communication networks. The leader who comes in and just wants to have a free-for-all exchange of ideas in a hybrid setting will find that the ideas will only come out of the people who are in the physical room, because they can dominate the conversation. And the people who are joining virtually have a hard time getting a word in edgewise. And then you will end up with a decision that is not as good as if you had everybody weighing in and participating. So you need training of your people, and you need training on the technology.
Yeah, that is so true. I'm going to be recommending your book all over the place.
Oh, thanks, Alicia. I appreciate it. That is very kind. It's always a great conversation with you. I'm glad you're doing well.
Well, it's not about kindness, it's about relevancy. So, but thank you for your time. You've been very generous, and I appreciate all of the great information and this wonderful conversation we've had. Thank you.
Thank you.